stage post-cold where my voice may be a little crackly, so bear with me. We're reading Matthew 24, 1 to 28. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when this will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Messiah,' and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and many of you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Messiah,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, 'There he is, out in the wilderness,' do not go out. Or 'Here he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather."
Thanks, Alanda. Good to see you all. If you don't know me, if you're visiting or new, my name's Murray. I'm the pastor here at St Hilda's. And there's lots of newish faces, or faces I haven't seen for a while. People have been all over the place, even to Antarctica, I believe, and are back with us. It's lovely to have you back as we kind of get into the year. I mean, it's February already, which is a bit scary, but here we are. Let me encourage you, if you are new or newish, you've been coming for a while, or if it's your first time, we have these cards called Connect cards. They're on the table and near the cafe area. And they're just a great way of letting us know who you are, that you're here. You can sign up for our news email so you know what's happening. Help you get a name tag as well so you can remember what your name is, and we can too if you need that. That'd be great. There's a card on the table, also through the website. There's some QR codes around. Love to get to know you better and have a chance to hear some more of your story. It's February, but it's not that long. It's been fireworks season a bit for our city. New Year's Eve a while ago, Australia Day. Some of you watch those in person, some on TV, some people go to bed. But we're really lucky in our city to have such a beautiful backdrop for these kind of events. We've got the Harbour Bridge, got the Opera House. We've got a picture there you can see. They're kind of iconic things which shape our harbour, our city. Anyone can look at that picture and go, "Oh, that's Sydney." And for me, they've always been there, as long as I can remember. There won't be many who could remember a time before the Harbour Bridge, or maybe it being built, or it's about 90 years old, I believe. But many of you will remember a time before the Opera House and the controversy that went into making that happen over many years. I read a bit of the story and surprised that they actually got it finished, to be honest. But for me, and for many, it's just always been there, right? It's hard to imagine the harbour without it. There you go. There's the harbour on the screen without the Opera House. You know, there it is. That's gone. It doesn't seem right, does it, to not have it there? I mean, the Harbour Bridge kind of makes you know where we're at. But sometimes these iconic places really define a city or a town. For example, can you pick what town or what city this is? Can anyone tell me? It is Paris, but how much easier would it be if that was there, the Eiffel Tower? It just, you would have got it much quicker. But well done. All right, let's try another world city. Anyone know what that city is? Oh, you guys are good. I wouldn't have got it without that, without the Golden Gate Bridge. And last one. Where are we now? Where in the world is... It's not Turkey. Yes, well done. You just need a few of these. And then we'll know where we are. That's Cairo with the pyramids. You would have picked it much quicker otherwise. I mean, these cities don't seem right without these icons. It's almost in some ways you can't imagine them not being there. We can with, CGI and those kind of things, but, they're just there. Now, they are kind of there, but in a way also, we can imagine these things disappearing. We can imagine these things being taken out. We live in a world post bombs, the atomic bombs. We've seen those pictures. We saw the Twin Towers fall. We watched more recently even the Notre Dame burn and gradually be rebuilt. But I guess we can imagine, we can see a time when these things wouldn't be there. We can imagine that. But today, in our Bible reading, we see the disciples grapple with an idea they couldn't get their heads around. And the idea that they could potentially lose their iconic building. This temple in Jerusalem, that's obviously just a computer reconstruction of it. It's a massive structure. It took them decades to build it, big stones. And it's unthinkable that it would go anywhere. And so when Jesus says that it is going to go, well, they assume he's talking about the end of the world. I mean, that's the only way this could go down, right? If all creation was going with it. So they're going to grappling with this idea. Jesus speaks to them of the end of the temple and also of the end of time. That's a lot for them to get their heads around, isn't it? And in some ways, it's a lot for us to get our heads around too. I mean, we can, these passages that talk about the end of the world take some grappling with. Like, we can imagine a bomb taking out one of these big, iconic buildings. But for us to get our heads around the idea of the end of the world, end of time as we know it, the universe as we experience it, that's hard, isn't it? That's hard to get our heads around. It feels in some ways a bit of the realm of the people on the street with the placards saying, the end is coming. It's the realm of maybe the cults who say, here's the time it's going to happen. Here's when the comet's coming. This is the day Jesus will return. People sold tickets to those events in the past, and, well, he didn't turn up. This whole idea can feel like it belongs in the realm of crazy, or at least in the apocalypse movies, right? Natural disaster, those kind of things. But Jesus does speak repeatedly of this time when he'll return, when he will judge, when he'll bring in the new creation. And we don't know exactly what that will look like. It's not entirely clear, but he keeps talking about it. We can't just put it off to the side and not think about it. Now, as we get into this topic, and today is reasonably introductory because the next few weeks touch on similar themes, but it's worth noticing that we come from different backgrounds on this as a church, as people. If you grew up as a Christian, if you've been Christians for decades, the generations kind of prior to mine would have some of them would have a really big focus on this end times theology, or eschatology it's called. It's one of those big hot button issues, how you interpret passages like the one we had read, or lots of Revelation. How you look at that, people highly focused on that, and the different ways you'd interpret it would cause splits in families, in churches, and those kinds of things, as people tried to figure out what the end times would look like. I think people from my generation and around that, in some ways got a bit tired of these arguments because, hey, the world hasn't ended yet, and, it might happen sometime, and it doesn't matter what I believe, what will happen will happen. So you can see how just in Christian world, it can have like a real hyper focus on it, or really ignore it, and we probably come from different points in that spectrum, even in this room. If you haven't kind of grown up with Christian teaching on the end times, you might have a different angle again that you bring to this. And there's plenty of non-religious discussion of the end times. I mean, we talk about it more in terms of climate disaster or nuclear destruction. There's what's it called? The doomsday clock. You can look up on the line. It kind of estimates how close we are to the world just going nuts and blowing themselves up. Think about the sun exploding or natural disaster, whatever it might be. This idea of the end of the world, as we know it, is pretty deep in our human psyche. Just the number of movies show us this, that it's kind of there in our thinking, as hard as it is for us to get our heads around. So we come to this idea differently depending on how you've been raised, what you've been taught. And so what do we do? What do we do when we come to these kind of passages? I think my priority, rather than kind of adjudicating between the different views on those kind of things, is to actually just slow down and say, well, what's Jesus' point? What's Jesus' aim as he teaches us these things? What's important to him? What's his priority? So we're going to start that a bit today, and again, it won't go amazingly deep. There's a few weeks on this topic. So what we'll do is we'll get a bit of a reorientation to the book of Matthew and think about just what Jesus' priority is in this topic as we scratch the surface. We're going to see what Jesus' big theme is for his disciples and for us as we think about these end times. Why should we bother thinking about it at all? So, we're in the book of Matthew. We started in October 2021. Now, we've made it to chapter 24. It's been a slow journey, but we've been on a lot of different sidetracks on the way through. But I think we're going to finish it this time. I think we'll make it to Easter and a bit beyond that. But we'll get to the end this time. And some of you have been here for the whole journey. Others have come along the way. But I'll do a bit of a recap. Matthew simply is a biography of Jesus. Written by Matthew. He was an eyewitness to Jesus' life and teaching and works. And Matthew pops up in the story himself. He's the former outcast tax collector, on the side of the bad guys, who leaves his wealth to follow Jesus. And there's a big theme that runs through the whole book of Matthew. And the theme is the authority of Jesus. And basically we're asking the question and answering the question, why bother with Jesus? Why listen to him? Why would people like Matthew leave everything to follow him? These themes kind of keep cycling through the book. And so way back at the beginning, my first sermon here was on the genealogy of Jesus, all his ancestors. And from that and through those early chapters, we really see that Jesus is the one that the Old Testament, that the history of the Israelite nation was pointing towards. He's the one they were waiting for, prophesied about. As he grows, as he starts his ministry, we see Jesus' authority over sickness and death and evil in the spirit world. We see his authority demonstrated in those spheres. We see him as the one who teaches with authority. The famous Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, turn the other cheek. There's so much in that teaching which permeates just the general wisdom of our world, and we use language from it. Jesus is shown as the authoritative teacher, and is shown as the authority compared to the other teachers of the day. And then the other big theme is this is a continuing knocking of heads, a continuing conflict, growing conflict through the book between Jesus and the religious authorities, the religious teachers of the time, people like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They've had several skirmishes, and they keep coming off badly, the leaders, being shown as morally bankrupt, the failed leaders, the failed shepherds of God's people. That's been building all the way through. We saw, last time we were in the book, we saw Jesus enter Jerusalem. And he was proclaimed as king almost. The people welcomed him like they would welcome a king. That's the palm leaves on the ground and the cloaks on the ground, and they're calling out that he's the son of David. The people are seeing his authority, which the leaders also don't really like very much. He comes to the temple that special place where God meets with his people. Sam, I've lost my clicker. Can you click back on? There we go. Thank you. The temple is all about God meeting with his people, the place where sins could be dealt with through sacrifice, their special place. And Jesus walks up there, and probably that whole courtyard area would have been full of shops and people selling animals and those kind of things. And Jesus turns the tables and says, no, you're doing this wrong. You're blocking people from coming to meet with me. This is another example of your failed leadership. He comes in and shows his authority over the temple. And he even kind of shows that, he's clearing out the money changers, all those kind of people, and he's almost saying, you don't need the temple anymore. You don't need it anymore. You have me now. I am God with you. I'm how God meets with his people. I'm where you find your sins forgiven. I am the temple. So this has been going through the book of Matthew, showing his authority. And along the way, all the way through, he's had some special friends with him, his followers. We call them his disciples. And all the way, they're trying to figure out his authority as well. And they've been a little slow on the uptake, which I find hugely comforting because I'm often slow on the uptake as well, slow to learn. And as we rejoin the story, this is still going on. The disciples don't quite get what Jesus is doing. Okay, so here's the context. He's been clearing out the temple, condemning the authorities in no uncertain terms, and now he's leaving the temple. He's walking away from the temple. That's where we dive back in to Matthew chapter 24. So Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to the buildings. So Jesus is leaving the temple, I think not just physically, but symbolically, turning his back on the temple. Its time is done. But the disciples, they're not ready to do this yet, are they? They aren't ready to let it go. They say, Jesus, look at the temple. Isn't it great? Why are we leaving? It's so amazing. The other Gospels have them saying, look what marvelous stones, what magnificent buildings. It's the pride of their city. It's the hub of their life. They're not ready to walk away from it. Look, Jesus, isn't it great? Jesus replies, do you see all these things? He asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Can you imagine that? What? This silences them. It just does not compute for them. They walk out of the city. They walk up the Mount of Olives, and this next to the city, kind of the gardens area, and it kind of overlooks the city. They can see the temple. They can see the city stretched out before them. They're trying to figure out what Jesus is saying. And they figure he must be talking about the end of the world. Verse 3, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Just notice what's going on here. He's told them about the destruction of the temple. They ask him about his return and the end of the world, right? They can't imagine this happening before then. The temple is so permanent for them. I think it's really important to notice what the question really is and to see what Jesus is talking about. Because this idea of the temple ending and the world ending are kind of, Jesus talks about them both. It's a bit hard to know sometimes what he's talking about and when. But we have an advantage on the disciples. We know, right? We know in AD 70, the Romans did eventually come in and squash the place. I mean, they were meant to preserve the temple, but something happened. They set fire to it. It was torn down. Legend has it that the fires in the temple melted the gold, which ran into the cracks between the stones. And so as they plundered it, they literally turned the stones over to get the wealth out, leaving it pretty destroyed. The unthinkable was going to happen. The temple was going to be destroyed. Now, the disciples hearing this is still a few decades off in the lifetime of most of them. But Jesus warns them about it. He prophesies. This is what's coming in the future. We need to know that's happening. Even though they think they're asking about the end of times, he's kind of talking about this. It's important for us to know this because if we don't know this is going to happen, the temple will be destroyed, then we'll think Jesus is simply answering the question about the end of the world. And so everything he says, we're trying to figure out, well, how does this point towards the end of the world? Do you follow? He said this. Are we looking forward to this before the end of the world? Or is this talking about, like we know it might be talking about the temple? And I don't want to, again, split hairs and say this is exactly that, this is exactly this. I think we can look at both of these things at the same time. I think in some ways the destruction of the temple is kind of like a precursor or an idea of what it will be like at the end in some ways. He can answer both at the same time. But let's just see what Jesus actually says as he addresses their question. They say, "What will the signs be of the temple being destroyed and of your return?" Jesus answers them. Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. But see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you'll be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Okay, so as you read this again, as we hear it again, knowing what I've been talking about the two horizons we're kind of looking at, I mean, it can be a bit hard to know what exactly he's talking about. But we do know that leading up to the destruction of the temple, there were plenty of people who claimed to be messiahs, and the Messiah returned. There were wars. There were even records of rumors of wars causing havoc. There were natural disasters. These things led up to the destruction of Jerusalem. And they've kept going, These things have been a constant in our world since the first century to now. Wars, rumors of wars, persecution, natural disasters, false saviors presenting themselves, increase in wickedness. Jesus said back then, this is the beginning of the birth pains, like waiting for the joy to come, but this is the beginning of the birth pains, and it feels like they're still going even today. The end did come from the temple, but we're still waiting for some kind of end of the world, right? Jesus looks towards both horizons, and it can be hard to split it all, but what's his priority for the people he's talking to? What's he trying to communicate to them? There in verse 12 and 13 it says, the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Jesus' call and his theme that's going to keep coming up over these next few weeks is standing firm. It's perseverance. It's holding on. It isn't necessarily knowing everything, but it's holding on to Jesus. That was his focus then, It's his focus for us now, and I'll come back to that in just a bit. So I think Jesus is quite happily blending, he's taken the disciples' question as it is, and quite happily blending what he says, looking towards the fall of Jerusalem as well as his own return. And you might think that's just confusing and a bit strange, but I think in the world of biblical prophecy, this kind of speaking and writing, it's not that uncommon. I mean, the Old Testament is full of prophecies, and we've seen how Jesus fulfills lots of those prophecies. But it doesn't mean there weren't other kind of earlier fulfillments of them. I'll give you just one example. This is from Isaiah. It's the prophecy about the virgin having the child and give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel. And it talks about how he grows up and gets older, knows wrong from right. And before this finishes, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid to waste. So it's there's this prophecy about a child coming and God being with them and the enemies being defeated. And if you keep reading along in Isaiah, I mean, next chapter, a child is born that kind of matches those, to a young woman. And, before they're a certain age, the enemies are destroyed. So there is a short-term fulfillment of prophecy. But when you read those words, you think Christmas, don't you? You think, Jesus. This is what it's pointing towards. And yes, it is also pointing towards Jesus in that kind of fuller sense. So it's just an example, right? These prophecies can point to multiple horizons. And so in a sense, Jesus is talking about Jerusalem falling and his return. And again, we're going to split it out too carefully what's what. Jesus' main point is he's calling his followers to perseverance. He's calling his followers to hold on. So this kind of writing is not uncommon. But it is really helpful to know that there is a short-term fulfillment, right? If we didn't know there was a short-term fulfillment, we'd be in a bit of trouble. Because it helps us make sense of some of these trickier things. I'll give you an example. We had it on the way through, and you probably thought, what's Murray going to say about this? Verse 15, Jesus says, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one go into the field to get his cloak," and so on, as we had read before. And if we're thinking this is all end-time prophecy, we're left going, what's this abomination that causes desolation? What's Daniel got to do with it? But knowing that this has kind of happened before, and if you look into Daniel, it's not that confusing after all. Jesus says this idea comes from the book of Daniel, a prophecy, and let the reader of the book of Daniel understand what he's talking about. And you go back and read it, you find there's a prophecy of someone coming and destroying Jerusalem and the temple. Like this was kind of foreseen earlier. The abomination that causes desolation will be this thing that comes and destroys it. And so we can quite happily say that, as the Roman army comes and enters Jerusalem and destroys the temple, this is an abomination. This shouldn't be. It's causing desolation everywhere. It was desecrating the temple. It was going into the holy place. It's a horrible thing, horror to them. But this is what Daniel said was going to come. And Jesus says this is going to happen, right? So he's saying this is what's going to happen soon, as was foretold. This is going to happen. But again, even in all this kind of mess, what's his priority for his people? His priority is their well-being, Don't go get your coat. Don't try and save things. Just get out of there. Get out of there. Do what I tell you, and don't stick around. It's going to go bad. This temple you have your hopes and your trust in to look after you is not going to last. It's not going to turn out well. Get out. So you see, he does kind of answer their question about the temple and kind of points forward to their bigger question about his return as well. And his big point with the return is you aren't going to know when it's going to happen. But when it happens, you'll know it. You won't know when. All these things will lead up to it, sure, but you won't know when it's going to happen. But when it happens, you'll know it. Don't be deceived by anything else. He's really clear on that. Verse 23. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is, out in the wilderness, do not go out. Or here he is in the inner room, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus is saying plenty of people will make predictions. They might just be confused, they might be trying to deceive. But Jesus says, don't worry about that. When I return, you'll know it. I'm not going to go lay low in the backwaters for a while and then gradually you'll find out. No, when I come back, you'll know. He's saying, don't worry so much about when exactly. Don't try and figure that out. But when I come, you'll know it. And we're going to talk about this more, but this is an important foundation. Jesus is much more concerned with us not knowing when it will happen, but concerned with how we live while we wait. He's much more concerned with perseverance than he is with prophecy. For the disciples, he wants them to know they don't need the temple. They don't need the temple. They don't need to be prepared to not have it anymore. But they have him. They need to know that. And I think for us, there's all kinds of things that we try and put our security on. We build our lives on things that we can think, look after ourselves and keep us going ourselves, that give us security. But again, Jesus teaches us there's no firm foundation apart from Jesus. Our job is not to know when he'll return, but to know that